And I think that's the key for us to see ourselves the way God sees us. So if we see ourselves in that as primarily a spirit being, then I think that then will give us that. That's why we have to be in heaven operating in our spirit. That's why Jesus operated in two realms, because he brought the Son of God and Son of Man perfectly together in one, that was able to manifest all those things. So yeah, I mean, it's a really good way of looking at it. And I think a lot of people do ask that question. Well, the people in the world seem to be a lot more successful than Christians generally. Why? Surely the favor of God and the blessing of God and all that stuff will be on it. So I definitely agree. And I think that's again one of those ways we can relate to those people who are asking those sort of questions. Why are we not seeing these promises? Why are we not seeing the things that we should be seeing? And being able to say, well, because we're not operating in the right realm, and we're not bringing that realm into this one, and it's what we do there that will actually ultimately affect what we do here. All that sort of stuff ties together in the same basic understanding of that, which I think is a really good point. Of that sort of dual realm, my spirit there, my soul here, I'm flowing from there to here, therefore I'm connected, and I'm operating in the best of both situations, because we were supposed to bring the rule of God into this realm. I mean, it's obviously clear that that's what God intended us to do, but we had to do it from that realm, and that's the bit that most people miss. And the power of the soul is a very powerful thing. I mean, that's what the pathway of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil was all about. It's the power of the soul without having God. And a lot of what has been done has been done as the power of the soul. I know Watchman Nee had a book that was called The Latent Power of the Soul, and he believed that there were a lot of even abilities within the soul that most people hadn't even tapped into, but some people have. And I think a lot of people who are operating in the New Age and the occult, there's an assumption that they're very spiritual people, but they actually aren't. They're operating in a dimension of the soul, because their spirit is not born again. So they're using maybe the drawing on the life of the spirit, but they're operating in soul power. So astral projection is a projection of the soul, not the spirit, which is the counterfeit, of these things. So I think, yeah, you're right. And I think the soul is very powerful, and that's why we have to be willing to surrender it and be led by the spirit, because otherwise we'd end up doing things in our own strength, which I think is an important element to that. And I think I've come across that quite a lot recently in regards to the whole thing about ketubah and things like that. If you don't really grasp the heart of it, it can become a very legalistic thing, like performance orientated thing. Well, I promised to do this, you promised to do that, so now I have this agreement that I'm going to hold you to. Where it really isn't like that. It's a relational thing that enables us to live in the relationship that all that brings about, rather than it's like, can you imagine you had, let's say you had your marriage vows, and you made some vows when you got married on your wedding day, and every day you brought them up to your husband or your wife and said, remember, you said this, and I want you to do this every day. And it would become a very non-relational thing. That would not be promoting intimacy and relationship. It would be a set of rules that you followed. And it would almost be, oh, so yeah, you're forcing me into this thing. And I think with the ketubah, it can be like that unless we deal with the essence of the soul. And I remember, I mean, I've sort of been reflecting over the last few years and where we are now as a church, having released the teaching, the end of last year. Now people are beginning to be impacted by it. And I remember what happened with me when I did mine. I mean, it's like, I mean, I did my ketubah, and I resisted doing it for a while because, you know, I think if I had done it at the time, I'm not sure I would have been ready for what happened afterwards. And when eventually in 2011, the end of 2011, I did it, it then brought me into the dark cloud, you know, because it follows this intimacy of marriage in terms of dance, you know, garden, dance floor, soaking room, bridal chamber, you know, and it's almost like, so now I've made this agreement, now God is going to have to deal with the performance orientation of my soul in alignment with that. So it was like, come into this dark cloud and come and meet with me, which was just like horrendous to my soul, wonderful for my spirit ultimately, but very, very difficult for my soul. In that what it did was it put his finger on the very essence of who I am, who he made me to be personality wise, how he wired me as a person, and then separating that from how I had used that to, in a sense, bring my own security, affirmation, and everything else. And so I had to go through that period of my soul having to come to the point of surrender at such a level that then when I didn't need to know, then God unveiled it. You know, and that was a massive change. Now people here are now suddenly getting the same invitation, and they're like, who am I? Why do I feel like this? And some of them, I sat with a couple of them this week and we were chatting, and like the person was saying, and I'm saying this, and I keep saying it, and it's like it was exactly the same things that I said when I was in that place. Why? What's going? What do I do this? How do I? You know, all these questions that my soul kept bringing up because it needed to know. So, you know, as our corporate ketubah, I know as a church we're going to have to go through that as well. Who actually are we? And are we a reflection of who God says we are and what He has given us as a blueprint, or are we a fraction of what we've done? Because it all comes down to, do I get my identity from what I do, or do I do from my identity? So I think the whole issue around, you know, the spirit, the soul, which realm we operate, how we do that, you know, is a really really important one. And I know that the ketubah for me was a catalyst for that invitation to come into consummation of my relationship, and then my spirit being in much more intimate depth with God, which is why now I don't have to try and figure it out cognitively. You know, so now I get a mandate from God. I don't go and try and figure out with my natural mind and everything else how to do it. I just allow my spirit to go and receive all that. You know, it all came out of the same thing. And, you know, the feeling of wholeness and integration, because I think looking back, that was where my soul and spirit really did get separated. You know, because God put His finger on the essence of it. And I think Ian Clayton talks about it as the dragon's well, the thing at the very center of my personality that the enemy uses against me because it is me. So it's the motive of my heart rather than the motive of my spirit. And that's, I think, when I look back, that was where dramatic change took place in my own life. And then God was at liberty to open up all sorts of levels of revelation and government that I could never get to before, because I was simply not able to, because of the strength of my soul. You know? So it's quite an interesting journey and process, but very rewarding at the end if you're willing to go through the experience. Now, hopefully, because some people have gone through it before, others can embrace it. Because I was sort of laughing at you know, the couple who were talking to me, and I was having a smile and thinking, okay, you know, and they were like, oh, thanks very much. That's really encouraging, isn't it? You know, oh, we're going to have to go through this. So, well, actually, embrace it. I didn't embrace it for 6 weeks because I was fighting in my soul, to know, because I didn't trust God without knowing. So I recognized it and embraced it, and then maybe it won't have to be that process for you or for them, So who knows, But I know, even talking to a few other people recently, it's just been like, okay, yeah, God is wanting to get us to a point where we are truly surrendered. And the essence is, when we deal with our gateways and all that sort of stuff, when God shows us an area of sin or an area of unbelief, or it's like you know what you want to deal with it. When he puts his finger on, well, this is who you made me to be. So, well, you made me this way. Now you're saying I can't be that way? It's a challenge to the essence of who we are, which is so much harder to differentiate the motives of my heart in that area, because it really is me. God wired me up to want to know how things work and explain them and understand them. But now I can do it from a spiritual perspective and allow my spirit to release that to me, rather than I'm going to do it by research, study, effort, all those things, because I need to know, And now I don't need to know. I know way, way more than I ever knew before. But I've just got that revelation in a different way. So it's good. Yeah, it's a good process and part of our journey, and I think one that God is really wanting to, bring us into, to be honest. So.
Well, I think it's also an element that doesn't really get discussed in church, because the soul sort of gets treated like the body is treated like the real trash heap. The soul is looked at as like something that's not really good, that you ignore, so that you put all the emphasis on the spirit. But the word says that Jesus came to save our souls, so evidently there is something of value there that was worth it for him to come and save. And I don't think we really understand that in the church as a whole.
Yeah. No, I think it's not. And I think if you look at Psalm 23, the Lord makes me lie down in green pasture. It isn't a suggestion or an invitation. It's like, if you want to your soul restored, you have to lie down in green pasture, which means stop trying to do it yourself and yield and surrender and let me do it, because he restores my soul. Why? For his namesake. It's for his glory, not for mine. It's so much more than just me, and this is where the thing comes about. It's almost like, no, I've got to get over myself in this and allow his whole bigger purpose and thing to come about. And it seems great. Oh, Psalm 23, isn't it wonderful? I can, no, he makes me do this, and if I resist, it's like, I think I get to walk through the valley of the shadow of death a little bit, So yeah, it's definitely something, that is often avoided, as you say, simply because people don't really want to go there. But
I don't know so much that it's avoided. I just don't think that people even realize that it's, a process to go through. Because I don't know that I've ever heard anybody ever really talk about that. Right. Or tell you, this is what you do and this is how you do it. I don't think I ever heard anything about it.
Right. No, I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. I guess some of it was probably dressed up in sort of inner healing type stuff, dealing with the hurts, but that's not so much the transformation of the soul, more of the healing of the soul. The restoration is a return to something that it originally should have been, which is a very different thing from the healing of the damage and the hurts that it got, and the bondage that it might be in through deliverance or whatever else. So yeah, I can understand what you're saying. Yeah, thinking back, the emphasis was always on healing or being set free, rather than restoration and transformation in essence of who it is, and identity is attached to that. So yeah, very interesting.
Maybe that's the book you need to write. Since you're not going to get to do quantum physics glory, do one on the restoration of the soul.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, Oh, interesting. We are in the process of getting ready to put a manuscript out in terms of to produce a book. It isn't that one, but that might well be the second one, because the whole transformation process is the essence of that. And writing it from the point of restoration of the soul and how that brings all this together, that's certainly, it might be something in that.
And then once you put the church through it, you can do the whole church manual of how to get your church's soul restored.
Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, definitely.
But I am serious about doing something about the restoring of the soul, because I don't think, for the most part, it's a topic that has ever really discussed or really been presented. As you say, a lot of it has been about the healing of the soul, but not about the restoring, that it gets back to what it should be. And then, like you say, realizing that God made you a certain way, but you don't have to operate out of that. There's a reason why you're made the way you are, but it's not so that you operate out of it. It's how He gets to operate through you.
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Rather than us operating, it's how He operates, as we have become a channel. Like Jesus said, the Father in me does His works through me. And I think that's because He was perfectly restored in it. Well, He didn't need restoring, did He? It was just, here's a picture of what it should be like. So if we want to know what a perfected sort of godlike being, because in a sense we were a living being, we degenerated into a human being, we get restored to being a living being, but we need to become a godlike being, and I think He was the perfect example of that dual realm, living spirit soul, totally integrated in that sort of way. So yeah, there probably is a book there. My problem is the time to go and write it. Well, because I'm just not a writer, but I think I've probably got enough material out there in the blog posts and stuff to pull something together, and then, maybe use that in this context to try and pull it together in terms of spirit and soul together, and integration, and the separating and integration of the soul. Yeah, I think you may be on to something there. I'll pass that on to those that can write here. Yeah, we've got to get this first book out first. The first one really is about something to engage those who should be part of the Joshua generation and isn't. So it's really more about the prophetic timetable and in trying to not reach the people who already know about what we're doing, but those who don't yet. And a book often can reach people in a different way than potentially blogs and internets and all that sort of stuff does. And I believe we need to be reaching out into the Christian community to help those who are in the valley of decision see something that they want to cross over into, an inheritance. And I'm really stirred by that myself, to administrate that. I want to see Emmaus Road experiences with those guys, basically having an engagement with Jesus that just takes the veil off and removes them from the coverings that have restricted them seeing the truth. So that's our first focus, is to produce something that will be really geared up to those who are not yet crossed over, but helps them to see, hey, there's a generation that took their inheritance, and there's a generation that died in the wilderness. Which one do you want to be part of? So that's the first one. But the second one, yeah, I think that would be potentially a really good subject. So yeah.
And even within like the groups, and the different ecclesias, it would be also another tool to use to help people coming in. Yeah. Like the first book you're talking about in terms of helping people to understand what this is all about, but then going on to say, here's another thing, that another important step that we need to go through,
Yeah.
not just to have the soul healed, but to be restored back to who we're supposed to be, so that God can work through the way that he made us instead of us trying to do it ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because that is the restored identity. You know, it's not just soul; it's spirit and soul and body together as a unified whole that then enables life to flow through us and enables the kingdom to come as a gateway and all those things. Because I guess that aspect of it, of being, you know, a house of God and a gateway, you know, sort of the gates in a sense is part of that, but it's the bigger picture of that is one I think that God, yeah, certainly would want us to help people with, because there's a lot of people going to need that help. You know, they may come into an environment which is, wow, you know, God's kingdom is here, but that doesn't mean that they're automatically instantly changed. So but we also have to see an accelerated process of that. You know, we don't want to see, you know, the harvesters come in and then they're going to wait 40 years before they get around to doing the harvest because they've gone through a whole lot of stuff for that long. You know, we want people to do really what the children of Israel could have done if they had have taken the direct route and gone straight into the promised land, which would have only taken a few weeks actually, you know, or certainly a few months at the most. You know, so if we sort of look at it from that perspective, you know, most people go 40 years and still haven't got there, you know, and don't go in. What could have happened if they'd embraced it straight away? So yeah, that's just, you know, a good way of looking at it. I might, I'll be thinking about that. Awesome. All right. Is that, I mean, if where are we? So you got anything else you want to ask or share? Any testimonies or anything?
Well, I'll just tell you, there's a local Methodist church here that is named after a guy by the name of Sam Jones, who in this area back after the Civil War and in the United States was had a great ministry in terms of being a revivalist, and his home is here in Cartersville. He's got a well-known legacy. Well, there's the Sam Jones United Methodist Church that was, for the most part, so unlike Sam Jones. I'm not even sure that most of the people there had a clue in terms of who he was.
Yep.
Well, about 2 weeks ago, they decided to have a revival, something that they have not done. I think somebody said in 50 years they had a revival service, and lo and behold, things actually started to happen.
Wow.
They actually, from what I understand, the first night had an altar call, which is something they never do, and a lot of people responded. So they said, okay, the next night they were going to do the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The place was packed out. And the third night they said, well, we'll do healing, and it was packed out again. So something has happened to the local Methodist church, which is really
awesome. Yeah. Well, that's that's the stuff that we need to start legislating for, because then what we don't want it to do is to stop there, but then to go into the next level of where that will take them.
Okay, so
yeah, go on.
What suggestions do you have that Joe and I can do? Because years ago we used to go to their Wednesday night dinner. We don't do it anymore because of schedule changes. So we got to know a number of the people there. And one day Joe said, I had the strangest dream. He said, you and I were running the School of the Supernatural down at Sam Jones. And we both laughed and said, fat chance of that happening.
Oh, wow.
So what can we do in terms of praying over that church to help keep things going? Even though we're not a member of it, what can we do to help facilitate that?
I think, start to legislate that from a heavenly perspective. Start to call forth, start to release the angels to go there, because when they start to get angelic engagement, so there's an ongoing, there's more being opened, and then really, look for the opportunity for that maybe to get outworked, because I'm sure they must be really excited that stuff is happening, and it's like what you want to then do is to take that moment and help them to see, hey, this is on a journey to go way beyond where you are right now, and you know, open that revelation up for them. And that might be that, you know, that you send angels out to make the right connections to you, so that you actually begin to engage with them, you know, all sorts of things, but that God can do. But start to legislate it in heaven first, you know, prophesying, calling forth, you know, doing that legislative stuff, you know, into that arena, and then be open for what unfolds for you to get personally involved in it. You know, I mean, why not? Why shouldn't we believe that these things can take place? I mean, if you go back 2 years, you would have probably thought that's never, even what's happening now is never going to happen there. I mean, I was brought up in the same environment. I was brought up in a Methodist church where the root of that message, it was called a Bible Christian Methodist Church. And that Bible Christian Methodist Church was birthed in revival. You know, that Methodist church was birthed in revival in the what was called the Shebier revival, and that was a really amazing move of the Holy Spirit in, I think it was something like 1900, so 18 something, and I went there for the first, you know, 16 years of my life, and I never even heard the word revival. I never even heard, you know, where the roots of it came, where Bible Christian Methodist came from, because in our town Methodism was quite a big thing, because we had Wesley and had come into our town, and so we had the Bible Christian Methodist, we had the Primitive Methodist Church, we had the Wesleyan Methodist Church. We had about 7 or 8 different Methodist churches all in the same town. All birthed out of something, and probably none of them had any idea of what the history was, which is so sad, really, isn't it? But that's what happens. It gets institutionalized and put into a religious setting and mold, which misses out its roots and history. So when I moved up to North Devon, where I am now, that's where this is where this revival was birthed, just about 20 miles away in a small village called Shebier, and that's what birthed that Bible Christian revival. So I've moved into the area where it actually sort of took place, but never had any inkling of that in all the time I was there, you know. And I think that's what God again wants to restore, bring things back, and then move them forward into a whole new dimension. You know, because that's to jump from where, let's say, a Methodist church into engaging the heavenly realms and the angelic realm would be a massive shift. But to get back to where the Methodist church started, with signs and wonders and amazing things, and then take them from there into where it's going, it's like that's possible. You know, I mean, it's almost like the children of Israel in Egypt, and they come out of Egypt, and it's an amazing thing that the Red Sea opens up, and all these things happen, and they're like, wow, and we've got an amazing God. You know, and then it's like 40 years of slog through the wilderness, and then all of a sudden now we're going to see the Jordan open up. So we're going to go back to where we began, but now we're going to go into another different realm and into another dimension of this is what our inheritance really is. So that's the sort of thing which I think we have to start legislating for. You know, some of these churches that are, you know, maybe very traditional, very institutional, let's start calling back them to their roots, calling them back to revival, calling them back to engagement with the Holy Spirit. Because once they're then in that, then there's a possibility of them going into the next level of that. So yeah, again, it's something that we have to look at and begin to, I think, do something about. You know, I think we can't just sit around and wait. We need to start legislating that and calling it forth, and sending the angels to those churches to stir the hearts of those who are going to say, let's have a revival meeting. You know, the first one in 50 years. Well, what caused that to happen? Well, I believe it's the stuff that we're doing, the stuff that we're doing in the heavens. You know, calling out into the wilderness, calling out into those institutions. I'm doing it all the time. I do it every day. You know, and I know others must be. So it's like, you know, where we see that in our own area, you know, what other places there I've got a history and I've got that could be restored and revived, you know, because it's so much easier to do something which has got some life in it. You know, so revivals are we're in a reformation, but it's so much easier to have a reformation if you've got a revival. You know, it's very hard to reform something that's really dead. You know, but it's easier to reform something that's got some life in it. So let's start stirring some life in these places, but then that they don't get stuck again. Because the reason that you've got, you know, all the different sorts of Methodist churches, because they all got stuck at one point and divided over something that happened. You know, we want them to move forward. So yeah, very good. Okay, all right. Anything else? Plenty of time.
Well, I just wanted to real quick give you a pretty cool thing that I've discovered, and that is I really enjoy digging into the Scripture and looking at different translations and everything. And recently I came across a translation. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Mike. It's called the Jonathan Mitchell New Testament translation. And this guy was a Greek scholar who went back to the original Greek, the Koine Greek, I guess, is what was the actual spoken Greek back then. And he takes all the nuances of the Greek that was the way it was spoken and understood back then, not just classic Greek.
Yeah.
And he translates the New Testament as kind of like an amplified version, and he takes into account all the tenses, all the everything. And it has been a gold mine for me in reading the Scripture. I mean, one that I shared with our group was just that classic story in Matthew where Jesus is, it's the preamble to the story of, build your house on the rock and all of that, where he says, many will say in that day, I didn't know you, but we did signs and wonders and all that. Well, the whole context of that, when you read it in the Jonathan Mitchell translation, is that he didn't know you in the heavenly realms.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's not just didn't know you as in, like I've always heard, we don't have an experience, a relationship, but I didn't know you in heaven.
Yeah.
And so it's really neat. So, and it's a free online, so you can go and get it, and I recommend you, check it out. It's pretty cool. Oh, Sean says he went and bought a copy. Yeah, it's amazing, and there's so many. And then too, the end of that where it says, I didn't know you, so I'm going to cast you out. Well, it's always this, we're going to get lost. But it's in that translation, it's very redemptive because it says, I'm going to send you to a place where I'll work on you some more until you begin to see the truth.
Yeah,
it's
which is the outer court.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is what the outer court is.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. I mean, a lot of people have said to me about that. Okay, if we go into the age to come in an outer court, are we stuck there? And I'm thinking, well, how could we be stuck there? Because we're into a place where we can engage with God, and of course we're going to increase in our knowledge of God and maturity, and even though it may be a different age, there's still going to be that change and transformation, and I think that's a really excellent way of thinking about that, and an excellent way of looking at it, because again we again read things from our present day context, and most of it through some theological perspective that we've been brought up with, and you miss out on the revelation. Because I've taught that for a long time, that's not saying that I don't know you in salvation. What it's saying is I don't recognize you according to your eternal perspective. You know, this is who I created you to be as an eternal being, and you may have done all this stuff, but actually that's not anywhere near what you have in your life as your destiny. So yeah, come into the outer court, and yes, there may be a bit of, oh, you know, I've got to deal with my judgment seat and look at all the opportunities I've missed, but then that's just a redemptive thing of now your scroll can still get outworked, because you don't just have an earthly part of your scroll, you have an age to come part of your scroll, and ages to come part of your scroll. And I think people just look at it and think, oh well, when Jesus comes, well, that's eternity. Well, nowhere does it say that that's eternity. It actually talks about the ages to come. So there is more to come. You know, eternity has no time, whereas heaven does have time. It may be different from our time, but it's still time. And I don't believe there could be no end to the increase of his government if there wasn't a function of time. Because increase has a function of time, because it takes time to increase. You know, it's a process of increase. And I believe we're going to see that increase, even in terms of our own maturing and sonship, even after we're in that age to come, which gives, again, everyone hope. Now, of course, I want as much good and faithful servant now as I possibly can, because I don't want to do all the stuff I don't want to do here. But it gives us hope that this isn't the end, and we're not assigned to some cloud somewhere and that's it. You know, it's an ongoing relationship and growth and maturity, even in bringing the kingdom and ruling the kingdom. And yeah, they may have been those who wasted their talent doing the wrong thing with it, but God is still going to then enable them to come into the rulership that they should have had, but it may take some more work. You know, so that's good. Good, I like that. So that's, what is it, the Jonathan Mitchell?
Yeah, the Jonathan Mitchell translation. If you just type in Google Jonathan Mitchell, you'll get to his main website.
Yeah.
There you can actually download a PDF copy, or you can get a Kindle copy, or you can actually buy a hard copy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sounds great. I'll have a look at that. Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, Mike, essentially what you said was like the old commercial. You can either pay me now or pay me later. We can either deal with it now,
yep,
or we'll have to deal with it later.
Yep, exactly it. Yep, that is exactly it, I think. Yeah, and how much better to deal with it now, because we will then get the here is what your destiny was in this age, and you have been faithful to it. You know, which is, I guess, you know, the better option without a doubt, because I don't really want to start off in the outer courts. You know, I'd rather start off in the inner court and then see where that goes. You know, but I guess that's where some of the then things around that, I guess, purgatory and some of the doctrines, you know, which sort of paint it in that way, probably where they came from, you know, but they just got sort of religiousized and then put into something that we, as Protestants, we reject, you know. And there's the same thing with a confession of sins and all that stuff, and then the confessional, well, we know it's in the Bible, we just sort of reject the format that it gets worked out in, but there's probably a lot of truth like that we can rediscover by getting a full perspective of what it is that they were originally saying. You know.
Well, purgatory, actually, the roots of purgatory actually come out of Judaism.
Yeah.
There is an element of that actually is in Judaism, of where the soul goes through this refining process after death. You know, whatever you didn't straighten out on this side, it has to go through it. So they have their own version of purgatory in Judaism.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I guess the key to it is what we're seeing is this is about relationship and a process through that, rather than a process of punishment or that type of thing. there's a grace mercy in this rather than a legalistic. Okay, well, you're going to have to go through a whole series of punishments to put it all this right, because I don't believe that's the case. And the enemy will always try and twist something to make it out bad, won't he? Or an unpleasant process. I mean, there is a sense when you go before the judgment seat and you have your scroll unveiled. I mean, there is a sense of regret and loss. I mean, there is, but there's no condemnation with it. There's just a recognition. Oh yeah, I missed that. I missed out on that. And I missed being able to do that. There was no condemnation. The eyes of his fire, the fire in his eyes, is love, not condemnation or punishment. His consuming fire is love. It's a consuming fire of love, not punishment. And I think that's the key to these, is making sure that we have a true perspective of who God is, in that it will always be out of love that these things take place. But what a wonderful thing to see, actually, in the age to come, even though you may not have fully outworked everything here, there is still an opportunity of continuing to outwork what you would have been called to do. Now, who knows what the process might be? I mean, but for me, it's going to be a process of love, not one of fear and punishment and damnation. It's a love thing. And yeah, you might describe it as almost like our response may be a wailing and gnashing of teeth, because we'll realize how much we missed out on, not because he's making us feel bad because he's punishing us. And I think, again, you can look at that. It doesn't say anywhere that God made them wail. They wailed in response to, I've missed all this. And what does it say? He wipes away our tears. So he wipes away the tears. So there's no need for ongoing tears, because he wipes it all away, which is a good thing.
Well, this is also a little bit off the subject, but did you ever read the book The Shack?
Yeah.
Okay, he has written another book, and it's called Eve.
All right.
And it has elements of the main character deals with John the Baptist, although she doesn't know at the time who he is. She deals with angels. She travels back in time into the garden to see what happened. It's just a very interesting look.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I really like. I know people have different opinions of the shack and everything else. Most of the opposition came from the religious system that couldn't face God having a woman's persona. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, I found it very, very revealing about how Father, Son, and Spirit work together, and wisdom, because wisdom's in there. And for me, it was just like, yeah. I had no issue with it at all, and the character of God and how God, as in terms of the lady woman, I mean, it challenged obviously a lot of religiosity. For me, I just thought this is an insight into the personality and the relationship that God, and then how we relate to that. And I think, and again, the restoration part of it.
Right now.
Certainly the relationship side of it, because you had the whole thing of the garden and the weeds and all the stuff in the garden, and the sense of how that got result, and the forgiveness and the being able to engage in redemption of our past and the things that went on. I thought it was a really excellent thing. Now I know people criticize a lot of it, but I certainly found nothing to criticize in it. That's for sure. Anyway. So okay, I'll look at that.
I believe it's called Eve,
Right.
but it's also interesting. I know a lot of people got upset about the father being a big black woman.
Yeah.
But Dr. O talked about the first time that Jesus showed up as a white guy to him, and he got really upset. and argued with Jesus because Jesus always was a black man to him.
Yeah.
And he argued with Jesus and said, "You are not my Jesus." But he said he never thought that he was prejudiced.
Yeah.
Because when he moved from over here, coming from Nigeria, he didn't go through the whole slave mentality and things like that. But it really showed him that, he was. And he said it was a tough thing that he had to go through to finally realize that Jesus could be white. And then he saw Jesus as an Oriental. He said, and that just, the Lord was just knocking off a lot of things, but it really took him a while to realize that Jesus can look like anything he wants to, and we can't put him in this slot, or God in the slot of this is what he looks like, because I've made him in my own image. And so I think that was part of what that book touched on, that really got people a little, ugh.
Yeah, I see. For me, it's like we don't really have a history of sort of that racial things. Certainly from where I lived, it was never really an issue. So I had no problem with that. And of course, I've met Jesus in loads of different forms, and some of them have been feminine when I needed it, and so I have no problem with that at all. But I can understand why it would cause the religious system to respond to it, particularly as it probably wouldn't have been such a response if it was a white woman, but actually a big black woman actually probably even intensified it more, particularly in the southern belt. But yeah, and I think it is trying to see a redefinition of our assumptions and presumptions. That I never even thought about it, to be honest. That if you were black yourself, that you would see Jesus as black. But I guess that's the same thing, isn't it? We just create something in our own image and our own expectation, so we can relate to that. Oh, that's good, actually.
Well, I can remember being a kid in Catholic school, and a missionary from China sent over. We used to have what we called holy cards. And this was the Madonna and Child, and they were Chinese. And I was appalled. I was like, don't they know that Jesus is white, that Mary is white? I was just so shocked.
Yeah, well, you could have seen that, yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. But in reality, even from the perspective of where they actually lived, they lived in the Middle East. It was East, not West. It certainly wasn't a Western culture. The whole Hebrew culture wasn't Western. If a Western one existed in that, I suppose Greek and Roman, I suppose, would have been what the Western culture was based on. But Jesus didn't come from that culture anyway, did he? So he wouldn't have been pure white with nice blue eyes and a blonde halo and hair on it. It's like he certainly wasn't like that anyway, was he? So yeah, it's funny when you sort of realize how many preconceptions and assumptions that we have, that when God starts to challenge and put his finger on them, it really shakes some of the foundations of the things that we just never even thought about, but we believe. What are our underlying assumptions that we don't even realize that we have as underlying assumptions? That as soon as God challenges them, then we start to realize, oh, I believe that. And then he said, that isn't true. It's when some unveils come off and you start to see things, it's almost like, for me, I think, wow, why didn't I see this before? Usually, and it's like, but there's more and more of that coming. There's more and more, and we don't know until we know, do we? That's the thing. Until you have something unveiled, you just don't know. And there are so many unveilings that are taking place. And if we embrace it rather than kicking and screaming against it, then change and transformation is so much easier. Being flexible. And not having God in such a box that he can't ever get out of it, which is part of the problem that religion has put him in their box, in their image, rather than, we are all in his box. Yeah. That's yeah, good. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Well, Mike, I wanted to ask you if you'd had a chance to see Arthur Burke's newest little revelation that he just sent out. It was something he just sent out in his newsletter and a few places. It's a revelation he got concerning covenants that are hidden within contracts that we have in all different areas of our life. He's identified 18 different areas, like in birth, in death, in insurance, in business dealings, and extracurricular activities like even sports, and even software where you sign an agreement and all of this kind of stuff. Anyway, he has these prayers that he takes you through to cut off all of this stuff. And did you get a chance to see that yet? I know he just released it just recently.
I've seen the email, and I saw the title of it, hidden, the thing with hidden within contracts. So I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But it sounds interesting. I like Arthur Burke. I like his, he has a systematic approach to things and always comes out with some good things. And it's a totally different way. But I resonate with a lot of the things that he says and a lot of the things that he's brought. And again, from particularly the understanding of how our spirit and our mind and how we can be set free and changed and transformed within our mind to begin to think in a heavenly way rather than an earthly one. I like a lot of the things that he's done with that, so I'll have a look at that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I found it interesting in the prayers he does. He is taking more and more of a courtroom approach. Like he says, let's approach the throne room and let's ask for the judge to rule in our favor and get a decree and stuff like that. So it's interesting. His language is changing.
Yeah. Well, anyone who's open like he is to new things, is going to pick up this revelation, and hopefully it will then lead him to having encounters within that realm, which go beyond the sort of the faith of encounter of, well, we're praying from this perspective to we're going there, and actually we can administrate from there rather than do it from here, almost like, okay, we can approach the throne room in prayer, but what about approaching the throne room in spirit? Because it's only one step, isn't it, more into crossing over into, wow, this is open for us to engage in this way. Now let's go beyond the veil and let's engage. And I don't know that he has that revelation yet. I certainly know that he's very open to, in a lot of ways, it's very interesting things that he brings out and everything else. And I know he has had visions because I've heard him share them. It would be great if he then took a step across into activating that, and I'm sure he will. I'm sure God will. He's on a journey. I don't get the point that he's ever built a mountain that is stuck. He's on a journey, and I'm sure that journey is heading out him into the fullness of what God wants for him, which will be great. Because I think his stuff's really good.
Well, I guess the thing I wanted to ask you about that, Mike, is I can see a little bit of a danger in it, in that kind of like when, Patty and I got into inner healing, and we even got into deliverance, and even getting into SRA type people and people with split personalities and all of that, and you start digging into that kind of thing with people that have altars and DID and all of that, and it is a never-ending. You just dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's more and more splits and more stuff, and it's like, okay, now we've got these hidden contracts that we didn't even know about, and now, oh man, if I don't say all the right things and pray all the right prayers, it's like, oh, I just wonder, I mean, do you have anything to say about that, about getting our eyes off of Jesus and off of, looking too much into the darkness and how the darkness functions and what their capabilities are, kind of lifting them up into this, wow, it's even worse than I thought it was,
Yeah, no, I understand that. And we've been through that journey in that, we were very into sort of deliverance and certain things in terms of ministry, and the focus used to be, in terms of the manifestations of deliverance, and once you saw a manifestation and it would leave or whatever else. We then, once we began to operate in a higher level of authority, we don't see any manifestations. Very, very rarely do we see a manifestation, but we see a lot of deliverance, because the focus isn't on the negative, it's on the positive. So we focus on the freedom rather than the deliverance. It's like the whole focus is on, so it's always the love of God and everything about the love of God rather than the enemy. So and the way a lot of people, well, they want to put the enemy in its place and whatever. We're not interested in the enemy. We're interested in God and God's purposes at work. And if that means we need to subdue and overcome the enemy, we will. But we're always focused in what is God saying, what are we called to legislate and come into agreement, that side of it. So I understand what you're saying there, because people are looking for a quick fix. And if we can just pray a prayer and it'll be done, then that's a quick fix. So when I receive revelation of these sorts of things, I add it to my sort of toolbox, if you like, and then let's say I was engaging in a court case, then God can use the contract thing in a court case. Oh, there's a legal right here, without having to go and try and dig into everything that you might or might not have done. Let God bring it up. Let the enemy bring it up. If you're trying to deal with an area, okay, let's hear the accuser. Well, the accuser may well say, yeah, your family made a generational contract. Great. Well, that's sort of, it's just another terminology for the same basic thing. We talk about generational bloodline issues. This is what this is. They are legal contracts that were made in the past, or we've made them, that we now need to say, okay, I repent of that, and on behalf of my forefathers, now I have a verdict that sets me free from that legal right. So rather than, oh, we're going into a whole load of fresh digging for all these contracts we may have done, we only need to do what the Father is showing us. So I present myself as a living sacrifice. He can split me open and show me anything. But I don't do any digging unless he unveils something. I don't need to. I present myself and I say, remove every obstacle or hindrance from me, strip everything away, that anything is a hindrance from stopping me fulfilling your purpose in my life today. And if he doesn't show me anything, I don't go trying to find anything, that's for sure. If he does show me something, I'll deal with it. And he may use that, show me through my reactions to something or a blockage to something, and then I will go and, okay, why is this a blockage? Rather than, now we have a whole lot of things that we're all going to go into because now this is the next fad. It's just, okay, that's an interesting way of putting it. And when I do a legal case, then that's something that may come to me as something that's done. But it's probably just terminology. And some people will relate to that terminology and then may be more careful about the things they do, because we do need to be careful about making commitments and covenants like the Joshua generation did. Who with? The Gibeonites. And they made a covenant because they were fooled and tricked into doing it. And that was ongoing for the next, I don't know how many generations, that covenant, that decision came back to bite them. So we do have to be careful, and it's more about being careful what we do as much as, oh no, what are all these things now? This is terrible. Well, just because I know that those things might be there, I don't have to let that affect me until God shows me and specific instance, or the enemy reveals that in a court case. So that's how I would deal with those type of things. It's probably something we've already got some understanding of, just probably presenting in a different way, and then make sure that we just don't go digging or trying to go through a list. You know, even, you know, in what I do in terms of the transformation series and all that, it's a set of principles, not A, B, C, D, do this, 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 and this, and then you'll be all sorted out. No, it's engage in relationship, surrender to the process of God being able to unveil this stuff so that you can deal with it, and then deal with it. But get on with your life. You know, and that's the problem. People get so caught up in this whole ministry, and as you say, this, and the enemy has a lot of time-wasting spirits that will masquerade all the time as something the same old, same old, same old, and it's the same thing. Just fooling you, thinking, oh, there's another. It's like, okay, there's a lie bust. Let's ask for integration, and if God shows something that needs integrating and a part that needs it, let's deal with that. If he doesn't show it, let's not go trying to find something that may not be there. Because if we're open and surrendered, then God has got totally at liberty to reveal that to us. And that's the thing. Only do what the Father's doing, not what we think we should do. And that's the danger of a systematic A, B, C, D steps of doing this. It takes the relationship out of it. And it takes the, okay, I'm going to serve the purpose of God in my generation and have a heart after God, and anything that's in the way of that, he'll no doubt show me because I want him to. But unless he shows me, I'm just going to get on with it. You know, not burying my head in the sand, and because every day I present myself as a living sacrifice, and I say, you can strip me away, you can open me up, you can remove my head, you can do everything that I need to fulfill it today. Go ahead. You know, I present my heart on the altar for DNA transformation. Unravel me. But I don't need to go into, you know, the nth degree of it unless there's something that he really particularly wants me to understand or know. You know, I take, you know, communion every day for transformation. I don't need to know most of what he does when I'm taking it. I just need to benefit from the change that it brings. If he wants me to know, then he'll tell me. And that's how I go with these things. I don't go fishing, you know. And I think you're right in that there was a never-ending, decreasing circle of stuff that just took you down the plug hole, basically, in that thing, because the enemy latched onto it and just started getting people more and more into, you know, going into the end. And the same thing with Freemasonry and all those stuff. Yeah, there may well be Freemasonry in different things, and there may well be different degrees in your family, but bottom line is, it's like greater in us than is in the world. He is in us is greater than he is in the world. So no matter what that did, it's not more powerful. And so, you know, we only have to do, I think, what God's showing us, and that's the key. And that will free a lot of people from going around unnecessary circles and back to the same place and around again. You know, because that's what happened. I know that. I remember in 1997, we were birthed in the sort of whole move of the Spirit and all that stuff. And deliverance was all part of that. There were manifestations of the Spirit and all sorts of stuff, but most of it was manifestations of the flesh as the Spirit engaged it, you know. So, but in reality, I went to a conference, a John Wimber worship conference it was, and while I was there, God said, you're giving more glory to the enemy than you are to me. So I thought, well, okay, show me how. So, well, all the manifestations that are going on when you come to worship me, just take a distraction off worshiping me. So I came back and I said, look, this is what God said. And I said, we want to be open to whatever the Holy Spirit wants to do with us. We want to have that liberty in our midst of God working in his way. But if there is manifestations where there are kingdoms in conflict, and okay, the kingdom of God is coming against the enemy in you, and there is a manifestation which is physical and whatever, and you need deliverance, we will take you out into another room. You know, it stopped just like that, because a lot of it was just the soul and the tension the soul wanted. You know, and as soon as we actually said, look, we're not gonna, you know, not that we're saying it won't happen, but we're not going to let it distract us in honoring and keeping God central to what we're doing. We'll do it not in front of everyone else, so that it causes everyone else to be distracted by all the noise and everything else. It stopped, you know. And I think, you know, that's the thing in all this. We want to keep God at the center of it all, and anything that keeps our eyes off Him is a distraction. And we don't want to be distracted, however good it might seem, you know, because there's people that, oh, look at the manifestation of the Spirit, and I'm looking, thinking that guy needs deliverance. You know, I mean, I remember ministering on a weekend in another part of the country here, and this guy was on the floor, and it was like manifesting this weird manifestation, and I sort of. Someone asked me to come and pray with him, so I shook him out of it and said, okay, what's going on? You know, and they were like, you can't do that. So I want to find out what's going on. Do you think this is good or bad? And he said, well, I've just been in Toronto and this is like, again, back in the 90s. I've just been in Toronto, and this was happening all the time, and they just kept saying, oh, bless him, Lord, bless him, more, Lord, more, Lord. So I said, well, do you think it's good or bad? And he said, well, I don't feel good. So I said, okay. So let's assume that this is God doing something wonderful here. Let's see, this may be the presence of God identifying something in you that He wants to deal with. So I said, okay, we're going to ask God to come again, and this time we're going to identify what it is. And it was a spirit of rejection. And it was like, bang, I just took authority of it, cast it out, and he was brought into peace. Well, he spent 2 weeks of that stuff happening, and no one actually had the discernment to see this was demonic. They just, because they were used to manifestations, they just sort of blessed them. You know, you've got to have to discern the spirits. And sometimes, you know, people are wailing and crying, and it's like, yeah, their soul is reacting to something. You know, and you just have to know, okay, is this demonic spirit? Is this the Holy Spirit? Is this the person's spirit? Is this the person's flesh? And you deal with, and sometimes it's like, oh, it's the flesh. Okay, we'll leave it. Not going to draw attention to it. We'll deal with it later, or we'll encourage the person. It's having that discernment to know what to do in every situation. And I know a lot of people, when a manifestation happens, they're so thrilled with manifestations, they actually don't really discern where they're coming from, in a way, because a lot of them does distract. And you don't want anything distracting from God being at the center of everything. And you certainly don't want the enemy having a whole load of glory put onto him, because he's causing a whole commotion. So I guess that sort of comes back to the same sort of thing, really. You know, yeah. But yeah. But I will have a look at that thing. But I certainly probably won't go trying to find out whether I've made any contracts. You know. Because I'm sure if I have, I've either undone them already, or God will show me when I need to. So, yeah. Anyway, all right, okay, all right. Well, we'll leave it there.